So I want to welcome you today. Today's webinar is Understanding Dementia 101, Caregiving Through Changing Abilities in Dementia Stages. And this webinar is one of CaringKind's 3 Understanding Dementia 101 seminars, which provide foundational information for individuals and families who are interested in learning more about living with an Alzheimer's or dementia diagnosis. For those of you who aren't familiar with CaringKind, let me just quickly share that we are one of the country's oldest not-for-profit charities focused on providing care and support for families who are impacted by Alzheimer's and any other form of dementia. And throughout our 45-year history, we've been one of the leading community-based organizations in the field, and we continue to launch new and evidence-based programs in the real world. We're one of the founding chapters of what's now known as the National Alzheimer's Association, and we've been known as CaringKind since 2015 when we decided to keep our independent charity status so we could continue to focus on providing services and supports to individuals, families, and professionals who were living with or impacted by Alzheimer's or other forms of dementia. We're based in New York City and have a national reach through virtual programs like these, as well as those for individuals and family members, our service and education offerings. At CaringKind, we serve the full spectrum of individuals, families, businesses, and communities that are touched by Alzheimer's disease and other dementias. And we do this through a host of programs and services and educational opportunities for people with Alzheimer's or any form of dementia, family members, partners, friends who are providing care and support, healthcare professionals, direct care staff, aides, service providers needing dementia training and coaching, residential, community, cultural organizations needing to become more dementia capable or dementia friendly. And we deliver programs and services virtually like this through Zoom and in person through a variety of ways in one-on-one sessions, small group programs, education seminars and webinars, trainings, and special events. Here you can see a quick overview of the types of programs and services we provide for individuals living with dementia and their caring family members and friends, and also for dementia care staff, professionals, communities, and researchers who support them. We have specialized services in multiple languages and for those in particular cultural communities and other affinity groups. And thanks to our donors, supporters, and robust fundraising efforts every year, we continue to offer our services free of charge to individuals and families. You can find more information about our services and programs on our website, caringkindnyc.org. And also on our upcoming seminars are found on a calendar under the Education tab. You can also find a link to our Education Hub for more descriptions of the different types of education seminars that we provide, as well as the slides and links to recordings from previous webinars. Every month, we offer about 4 seminars now, including monthly webinars on understanding Medicaid and another one on the legal and financial considerations for families. And you can find the next seminars on the education page. This month, we also have a webinar on preparing for the unexpected emergency. That's by Pam Atwood, a licensed practical counselor and a consultant here with us at CaringKind. Pam brings about 30 plus years of experience in the field and has lots of good resources to share on that day. And I also wanted to just highlight one of our social engagement programs that happens every month virtually. We do this both in person and virtually. And this is our Baseball Memories program. This is a program for whether you're interested in baseball or not. It's just a fun time of reminiscing about baseball. And it's great for individuals kind of across the spectrum who are living with dementia, as well as their family members or care partners. Today's seminar is going to be recorded and loaded on our website along with the slides. And just practically, we will save questions to the end of the conversation. And as we're going along, feel free to add questions into the chat at any time, and we'll review those at the end. And after the educational materials presented, we'll open up the gallery. You can raise your hand, you can ask a question directly, and you may need to unmute yourself just so everyone can hear you. I realize that this might be a tight window for those of you who are on a lunch break. And so if you need to jump off, feel free to do that. I won't take it personally. And I'll be willing to stay on for questions a little bit after if we go over time. So welcome. Today's webinar is Understanding Dementia 101, Caregiving Through Changing Abilities and Dementia Stages. This webinar is one of CaringKind's 3 Understanding Dementia 101 seminars, which provide a foundational information for individuals and families who are interested in learning more about Alzheimer's or a dementia diagnosis. Becoming a caregiver or a care partner to someone experiencing the cognitive and physical change from dementia requires new knowledge and skills. Just like any new role or job, learning to become a caregiver is no different, especially since the job of caregiving changes as a person's dementia progresses. Learning more about the stages of dementia, how a person's abilities change, and what strengths a person retains can provide a solid foundation for partnering in care and in quality living. So today we'll be talking a little bit about the specific cognitive changes that dementia affects and what those changes look like. Then we'll talk about the stages of dementia and how those stages are determined. And finally, we'll look at how people's functional abilities change over time and how you can best support someone in the different stages. This is going to be a high-level introduction, so please know that we go into more depth on the topics I'm going to be presenting today in other education seminars and in our one-on-one consultations with our navigators, and you can call or schedule one of those meetings at any time. Those are free and charge for families. As I said, this is one of our 3-part Dementia 101 series that we do here at CaringKind, and this talk specifically focuses on the abilities of a person and the dementia stages. We have another talk where we talk about the different signs and symptoms and types of dementia and what difference those make. And we also have another talk that focuses more on the emotional and relationship adjustments that come along with a new diagnosis. All 3 of those talks are offered we repeat those kind of monthly, a few each month, and those recordings are available and the slides are available on our website. I'm Stephani Shivers. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer and Vice President of Program Development here at CaringKind, and I lead the development of new programs and services for individuals and families who are impacted by dementia. I have over 35 years of leadership experience in community-based organizations, and I'm a second career occupational therapist who specializes in cognitive function. This talk today was co-developed with Dr. Ann Kenny, who is a geriatrician and palliative care physician. She's a professor emeritus, a caregiving daughter, and author of 3 books on dementia and caregiving, and Ann is a clinical consultant with the team here at CaringKind. So to get started today, I want to talk about what is dementia. Dementia is a general term which describes a category of conditions that deteriorate the brain. It's an umbrella term, like cancer is an umbrella term. In dementia, a person's brain changes impact their abilities in their daily activities and relationships. If you'd like more information on to do a deep dive of the signs and symptoms of Alzheimer's and another dementia, you can go to one of those other Dementia 101 seminars, the one on signs and symptoms, for more information. So today, let's talk a little bit about changing abilities. What abilities does dementia affect? And how does a person's abilities change as their dementia progresses? When we're thinking about changing abilities, we can think about a person's thinking abilities, and we can think about thinking changes and physical changes. So what are the symptoms? What happens? Dementia impacts actually multiple brain functions. It's definitely more than memory changes. And these brain changes cause a decline in several areas, and we're going to go through a few here, starting with memory, executive function, and language. Memory and language changes are really the hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease and several other dementias. And this is where we see this term forgetfulness. There are lots of types of memories, and some change quickly, some don't change, and some change later. Short-term memory has to do with a person's recent memory. Those are things like, what did you eat for breakfast today? What did you do yesterday? And these are called episodes. So sometimes that's called episodic memory. Long-term memory, those are remote events, old episodes, things that have come from the past. And long-term memory largely stays intact for people. Short-term memory is what is impaired. We have something called semantic memory, which is just kind of general knowledge about things, facts and things. That's a car, the sun rises. It's not particularly associated with an episode, but it's more general knowledge. Procedural memory is the type of memory where we just are kind of acting on remote pilot. You don't think about how you do something, you just do it. So the good example is brushing your teeth, how you actually do a shower, riding a bike. And procedural memory is housed in a different part of the brain. And so procedural memory also can stay intact very long term. And we can actually use procedural memory and train new procedures for people to engage in new learning when short-term memory is impaired. And finally, there's something that's called working memory, which is not really memory, but it's associated with, and this is, when you're learning something new or when you're thinking about something, this is kind of the information that you're holding in your mind at the time. It's what you're attending to right now. It's actually an executive function, which I'm going to talk about next. Sometimes the early clues that something is going on in a person can be seen as a result of damage to the front part of the brain, which you see here highlighted in red. This is called the frontal lobe, and this part of the brain is where our highest level of thinking occurs. And the functions that are there are called executive functions. And that's a good term because if you think about a chief executive officer or a business executive, there are a number of things that they have to think about in order to run a company. And those are all higher order types of things that rely on executive function. This is the last part of the brain to develop. It's generally fully formed by the time a person is about 25 years of age. And here you can see the list here of the things that actually change when there's damage to the executive system. So people have difficulties organizing their thoughts, organizing things, switching their attention or multitasking, planning an activity, initiating or getting something started, trouble planning for the future, because that's out there. You have to conceptualize what might be happening in the future and then to plan on top of it. A person can have difficulty understanding information, holding it in their head, getting the information out of their head. There can be mood swings, a lack of concern for others, a loss of interest in activities, apathy. A person can be socially inappropriate, because those are all things that are managed by a part of the frontal lobe. A person can have an inability to learn from their consequences or from their past actions, or to be able to anticipate consequences that might happen when something goes wrong. This is why safety concerns come into play. A person can have difficulty with abstract concepts or concepts that are in the future. Those are abstract. You can imagine the future, but those are really abstract concepts. And finally, a person can have a lack of awareness or a denial of their problems, again, because that insight, self-reflection piece is impaired. Language changes are another hallmark of Alzheimer's disease and several other dementia. People can have what we call expressive language challenges, where this is logical words or the production of words. A person can have a difficulty with receptive language, which is actually understanding the words that have been spoken. you hear the kind of the tip of the tongue phenomenon where the person can't find the name for the thing. They may pull a word that's related, but it's the wrong word. A person can talk about their brother when they mean their husband, or their son when they mean their brother. Those types of language changes are often seen. But we can also see some other thinking and physical abilities that aren't so obvious. Um, so a person's visual spatial function and their processing speed and ability and their sensory functions can also be impacted by dementia. A person can be overloaded with information, or their reaction time is slowed down, which is why driving can be problematic. Visual spatial function is having an understanding, being able to judge where a person is in relationship to the things that they're seeing. Vision actually happens in the back part of the brain, not just the eyeball. And so people can step off a curb or misjudge kind of how far a step is, or navigating a car, bumping into a car in the parking lot, or trying to parallel park. All could be very difficult because of visual spatial dysfunctions. And then dementia also impacts things like balance and motor planning of movement, which is your brain's ability to know kind of how does it move your body in space in order to complete a task. So if I want to reach out and grab a cup, my brain knows kind of how far to reach out my hand, to open my hand, to grasp the cup, to pick it up, how much grip strength I need. Those are all plans in my brain for that motor movement. As well as just general physical movement and coordination. All of those are managed by different parts of the brain. And so when a dementia impacts a different part of the brain, you can see changes in those physical sensory movement functions. And so the brain changes in thinking and physical abilities play into how a person lives their everyday life. And so we can look at the changes through the lens of what we call functional abilities. So we all engage in everyday activities, and we have categories for those activities that are called instrumental activities of daily living and basic activities of daily living. And so if you're in the medical community and we're trying to categorize functional abilities, you'll see this type of terminology. So your instrumental activities of daily living, those are the ones that actually require higher levels of cognitive thinking. And so those are things like shopping, meal preparation, managing your household, using the phone, planning transportation, managing money, doing your taxes, managing your doctor's appointments and your medications. And hopefully you can see that since we've talked about executive function, how executive function is required for those things that we all are involved in managing our everyday activities for living. Our basic activities of living, those are things like being able to get up, dressed, showered, being able to use the toilet, being able to manage your clothing after you've used the toilet, walking, getting in and out of a chair, getting in and out of bed, being able to bring a spoon to your mouth or a fork to your mouth in order to feed yourself. Those are what are called activities, basic activities of daily living. They don't require the higher level cognitive skills. They require more basic skills in order to provide, direct care for our bodies. So what do changing abilities look like if we look at those thinking changes and the physical changes and the functional changes, kind of how do they come together? So when a person has memory loss, that looks like a person repeating questions, repeating comments, asking the same thing over and over again, not taking medication twice because they've forgotten that they've taken it in the morning. Thinking challenges look like problems paying Bills, remembering to pay the rent, the mortgage, having a challenge with doing your taxes, managing the remote control or a new microwave, being able to do a smartphone or to use the computer. Problems with planning and problem solving, factor into things like meal management or not taking care of things properly, not throwing the expired food out of the refrigerator away, not getting rid of expired medications. Confusion looks like getting the facts wrong, mixing up dates, mixing up times. Emotional regulation looks like a person having a quick temper, overreacting, or having a short fuse is one that we hear of. Apathy looks like not caring about the result of something, person having dirty clothes or dirty hair or not taking care of their makeup, if that was a normal course of a person's daily routine. Lack of awareness looks like they don't understand or recognize that there's a problem with something, or that they have a problem, or that they have gaps in their memory. Word finding challenges look like word substitution or using general terms like thing, that, simplifying conversation, shortening phone calls and conversations. And then finally, decreased balance or sensory function looks like things like trips, slips, dropping things, complaining about eyes, getting new glasses, but still having, problems with vision. So now that we've got a little bit of understanding about what are the brain changes and what do those look like functionally, now we can talk a little bit more specifically about stages. And I'm just going to say, Pam, if you can actually let people into the waiting room, that would be great. Thanks. So what are the stages and how are they determined? What do they actually mean? Before I go into this, I just want to give a word of caution. There are some pros to staging and there are some cons to staging. On the pro side, staging provides an idea of what a person's abilities are and kind of a trajectory of what abilities will be affected as a person's dementia progresses. Staging can provide a guide for planning, and it can provide a way to understand a person's abilities and how they compare to other people who have had this disease and what their changes have been. So they can establish what we call a baseline of function. The cons of staging is that they can emphasize only what's lost. They can focus on a person's inabilities, and they can limit a person by focusing on the stage and not on the person. And so we want to be very careful that we don't just assign a number to a person and then begin to refer to them as a number or as a stage, because that's dehumanizing. So I want to give you a very simple overview of stages and a timeline, and to talk about what are the abilities that a person retains at each stage, because we really want to learn how to leverage the strengths that a person has in order to promote autonomy and independence and quality of life in a person for as long as possible throughout the course of their life. So stages are actually determined through assessments, what I'm going to talk about, and we can kind of generally divide stages into early stages, middle or moderate stages, and then late stages. And you can see here, there's a little bit of a timeline. Early stage can last generally 2 to 7 years, moderate 2 to 7 years, late stage 1 to 3 years. Those are guidelines. They're not hard, fast, and stone, but based on the experience that we have, those seem to, people will fit into those timelines. When we're talking about assessments, you're going to hear the term a screen, an assessment, and a staging tool. And they're not all the same, but I wanted to give you a little bit of just kind of mention some names of different tools that are used so that you have a little bit more understanding about what they are and what the differences are. So a common tool that's used to screen somebody for dementia and really kind of diagnose somebody that they have a cognitive impairment, a dementia-related impairment, is the Montreal Cognitive Assessment. So this wouldn't be used alone. It would be used in relationship to other things. But this is a widely used screening tool that's designed to detect mild cognitive impairment and early signs of dementia. And it includes things like a clock drawing, naming of animals, repeating sentences, and recalling words. And I'm not going to go into the details of this, but you can see that this assessment then, based on the score, a person is categorized. You can see whether they have a mild impairment, a moderate impairment, or a severe impairment. And we do know that a person's educational attainment, their level of education, can affect their score here, which was why you never just use one assessment tool to make a diagnosis. Another assessment tool is called the mini mental state. This one asks certain questions of a person, and again, the score relates to a probable level of impairment. Part of the annual Medicare wellness visit includes a cognitive assessment, and it's often this one that's called the mini cog, which will ask a person to 3 words are given to the person, and then there's time, and then they ask them what those 3 words are. And then there's also a clock drawing test, which again gets to kind of visual spatial and shows some hallmarks for Alzheimer's disease. And when we think about then, once a person is diagnosed, really, how do we determine what stage they're really in? That tends to be more on cognitive and functional abilities. And there are kind of 3 scales that you may hear of. One's called the Global Deterioration Scale, or the GDS. That one focuses more on cognitive decline. There's one called the Clinical Dementia Rating Scale, which assesses both cognitive and functional domains. And then there's another one called the Functional Assessment Staging Tool, which really emphasizes the functional abilities of a person in their activities of daily living. This is one, the GDS, the Global Deterioration Scale. This one kind of follows certain developmental milestones. It's got 7 numbers here. Again, I'm not going to go into this in detail. These are in the slides, and so you can refer back to them for sure. And if you have particular questions about them, we would be happy to answer them kind of offline. But this is the GDS, and you can see each number is associated with specific cognitive challenges or functional challenges. The clinical dementia rating scale looks at things like memory, orientation, judgment, problem solving, home and hobbies, and personal care. And again, there's kind of a score that's summed up and then provides a level of specific information. And then the functional assessment staging tool, this one, you tend to have more physicians are using this one in practice. And so this is kind of what the formal assessment looks like, but I think this is actually a more helpful description of what happens with a person. And so let me share a little bit more specifically about this one. So here you see in stage 1 is really kind of normal cognitive function. Stage 2, person may begin to lose familiar objects, unable to recall their loved ones' names, or their immediate family circle names. Stage 3, person might get lost while they're driving, forgetting more kind of significant milestones like birthdays and appointments, anniversaries. Stage 4, person's more withdrawn socially, struggling with everyday tasks like cooking, Stage 5, forgetting information or events, may get confused and go looking or wandering for something, or, on a mission for something. Stage 6 requires assistance with kind of everyday, those basic activities of daily living. There's pronounced memory loss here. And then stage 7 is really more of those late stages where a person is really lacking the coordination to feed themselves, to move independently, even in a bed. And at this point, as their physical abilities change, the muscles, the movements, the motor planning of external physical abilities is also happening internally. And so you have things like swallowing challenges and bodily functions that begin to be impaired. In the fast stage 6, it's further subdivided. And so you can actually see more, again, more specifically, where is a person based on the things that they can do or not do in their activities of daily living. And so in stage A, a person may have difficulty putting their clothes on in the correct order or choosing the right clothes without assistance. Once they get to B, they're really having a difficult time bathing independently. C, inability to handle the mechanics of toileting, the clothing management, maybe not doing cleaning as properly or properly disposing of the toilet tissue. And then finally, we see urinary incontinence caused from the dementia, and then finally fecal incontinence caused from the dementia. And then the severe stage language is severely limited to very few words throughout the course of the day. Walking abilities changing, sitting abilities changing, facial muscle movements, loss of ability to smile, etc. So what strengths remain in a person, and how do we know kind of where they are and how to best support them for ongoing connection and engagement in meaningful activities? As I said earlier, we kind of have that kind of normal, this is a real continuum there. We have normal abilities, we have early stages, middle stages, late stages, and end stages. And you can see on this chart kind of where those fast levels fit in. And so a person in those middle stages, that's where the fast level 6 is. And you can see the letters begin to progress from the fast 6, A, B, C, D, E, towards the later stages and then the end stages. But what does that actually mean? So in the normal phases, because executive function is intact, a person is really engaged in planning and learning new activities. They're able to do that because executive functioning is intact. When a person is in their early stages, they can be goal directed in familiar activities. What does that mean? You can give them a goal and they can understand what the goal is and know how to complete that goal. In the middle stages, a person may not be able to follow a goal, but they can engage in specific actions with their hands, with with objects. They can do certain tasks when told what the one specific action is. You can see a goal requires several actions together. In the middle stages, it's more one a direct instruction on what a specific action is. And I'll explain this more in the next slide. In the late stages, we're more focused on a person's basic body movements and their sensory abilities. And then finally, in the end stages, we're really focused on a person's sensory abilities because they have sensory and reflex responses. Now I'm going to put some numbers up here. And again, I'm going to give a word of caution because, as I said, executive function is generally fully formed by the time a person's about 25. There's a developmental continuum on cognitive abilities. And so you could talk about a person's cognitive age based on that developmental continuum. A person, a teenager is different than a 25-year-old cognitively. A 16-year-old and a 25-year-old, maybe physically post-puberty, there's not a lot of difference there, but cognitively, there's a significant difference. And so we can think about a person's cognitive age, but we can't negate their life experience and their physical age. And so even though an 80-year-old may have a reduced cognitive age, they're still 80 years old of wealth and lived experience. And so we never want to infantilize the 80-year-old or the 70-year-old or the 60-year-old by treating them like they're someone significantly younger. But I put these cognitive ages here to give you some idea of what's the cognitive capacity of a person in these various stages. And so in the normal cognitive stage, we kind of start at that 25. Progressing from normal into the early stages goes from 25 down to about a 10-year-old or 12-year-old cognitive age. So if you think about what are the cognitive abilities of a 10 to 12-year-old, that's what the cognitive abilities are of somebody in the early stages. And then you can see how those progress down. So by the time a person is in the middle stages, their cognitive ability for thinking is significantly reduced from a developmental stage. So, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about kind of what the functional abilities are kind of across this continuum. And these are based on a scale that actually comes out of occupational therapy called the Allen Cognitive Levels. I won't get too deep into the weeds for those, but I think that this information is helpful. So I've put on here kind of those cognitive assistance levels of what a person's cognitive age is, and then kind of what type of assistance they're going to need across the continuum. And so again, and those early normal cognitive, those early high level cognitive function where people are in the planning and learning new activities, they consider and make plans about the future. They can change vocations, their hobbies, their living situations. They can learn how to use a new phone, the remote control, the microwave, those things I discussed, and why can they do that? Because they can consider their options. They can consider challenges. They anticipate errors that might happen. They can respond to problems after careful consideration. They can do that before the problems actually happen. So they can anticipate what problems are with normal cognition. As that begins to change for a person, then they become more goal directed. And so a goal would be something like get ready for bed. The goal is get ready for bed. The goal is make lunch. The goal is get a cup of coffee. The how to do those things they can still do. They understand the goal, and the how to accomplish the goal is something that a person can do at this level. At this level, they still have they're very concrete thinking, but they have concrete thinking. Person might use trial and error to problem solve versus thinking about what the consequences are. At this point, they have limited insight, and that shows up because of the trial and error. So I'm not going to think about what might happen. I'm just going to try it out and see. And then if it doesn't work, I'm going to try something else. And so at this point, they need help. The cognitive assistance that they need, kind of a minimum level of cognitive assistance is needed to check in on a person's problem solving. They have what's called sequencing. At this point, sequencing is attacked, and I'm going to speak more about that. In now we're moving into those kind of moderate phases here. At this point, the person goals are challenging, but a specific action is still within reach. And so at this point, you say, put on your shirt, or if we're getting ready for bed, it's take off your shirt, you're going to put on your new pajama shirt, right? Wash your arm, wash your leg, wash your feet versus take a shower. A person here stir the ingredients that have already been mixed for them, or add one ingredient one at a time. Folding towels, folding socks, familiar activities. At this point, a person has that poor safety awareness, poor insight, and poor judgment because they're not seeing the consequences or able to think through the challenges of a particular scenario. So at this point, a person has impaired sequencing, a limited understanding of goals and tasks. They really are living in the moment at this point. They have a short attention span, and they need supervision really for quality at this point. In those kind of late moderate stages now, a person is really moderate and moving into the late stages. Here we're working with basic body movements, walking, standing, sitting, rolling. They can still do these things. They may have confusion about the objects that they're using, or difficulty navigating utensils for eating. At this point, a person will need significant assistance with all of their activities of daily living. And the person at this point is what we would call deeply forgetful. They may progress then down to very limited words, limited waking hours. And then finally, in those very late stages, the person is really just moving a body part. They may raise their arm, bend their knees. That's what their physical abilities will, their brain directing their physical abilities. At this point, a person can experience pleasure, pleasure and pain. They have reflex responses, and they are really more responding to what's happening internally, and they have more minimal arousal here. So what do you see, and kind of what are the hallmarks for those changes? And this is where we have this concept of sequencing. And so sequencing is a person's ability to know kind of what the steps by steps are to get through an activity. So if you think about the goal is to get dressed. I know the sequence that I need to go through in order to get dressed. I'm going to put on my underwear. I'm going to put on my clothes, my shirt, my trousers. I'm going to put on my socks. I'm going to put on my shoes. That's a sequence. There's a certain order of that tasks are done in an activity. A person begins to lose sequencing between the early stages and the middle stages. So if a person has sequencing, they're still in the early stages. When sequencing starts to break down, then they're moving into those more middle or moderate stages. And why do we look at sequencing? Because sequencing is really that point at which somebody needs more direct cognitive assistance in order to be able to do the activities of daily living. And so as a person is losing sequencing, then we start providing cognitive assistance, and the cognitive assistance comes in the form of cueing. And so there are different ways that we cue people in order to promote their autonomy and their quality of life and their independence. And so cueing can be a visual cue, it can be a verbal cue, or it could be a tactile cue. And so coming back to this chart, we've talked about, we know where kind of sequencing lands here. And so now we can say, like, well, what kind of assistance does a person actually require? In the early stages, as memory is starting to go, memory lapses, we can use visual cues and checklists to help people to remember what they're supposed to do, how they accomplish their goals. When they're in their middle stages, it's much more verbal cues, in the sense that you're providing direct instruction for every step of the sequence, every step of the task. So because they can't sequence themselves through, now they have to be told, a person has to be told verbally how to sequence themselves through an activity. And then finally, in the late stages, because understanding verbal cues is challenging, then we move to more tactile cues, or are actually hands-on assistance to help a person, put their arm through the sleeve, or to bring a spoon to the mouth, or to, tapping on a person's foot to help them, pick their foot up, for washing. And so here's just kind of a summary. If you're, if you're a professional working in the field, some of this language might be familiar to you. So in the early stages, a person really needs to be kind of set up for an activity. They might need minimum cognitive assistance, probably not a lot of physical assistance. We may just be standing by to provide physical assistance if we need. In those middle stages, they need moderate cognitive assistance and probably minimal physical assistance. And then finally, in the later stages, they need both maximum cognitive assistance and moderate to maximum physical assistance. So what does this look like? So then in the early stages, we're really setting a person up to kind of do routine and familiar tasks that may require kind of 1 to 3 step directions, because a person still has sequencing here. So that might be engaging in food preparation or whatever the familiar activities are for a person. In the middle stages, it's more step-by-step instructions using kind of physical or, visual and gestures on how to do those with the verbal instructions. So, here in the photograph, it may be that, you're setting out the clothing and you're saying, put on your socks now. In the advanced stages, it may be single step instructions. The person might use their hands. We're using much more sensory experiences or hand over hand activities. So there's a lot of words on this slide here, and I really put this in here more for reference for you to come back to the slides if you want to, to read through this more specifically. But I think the key here, which I've highlighted down at the bottom, is, families are always reaching out and trying to figure out how much help does a person need? Can they live alone? At what point do they need to have somebody with them? At what point do they need 24-hour supervision, et cetera? And so here, again, here's some guidelines. When a person has sequencing, they can live independently with someone checking in to provide intermittent support. And again, there's always exceptions to that rule, but that's a general idea from a cognitive standpoint, is that with support, the basic, tasks of living, they're still able to do. They still need help with those higher level cognitive issues, but kind of the day-to-day, because they can accomplish the goals in their routine activities. Independent living, seems to be okay. Where it begins to shift is when they lose sequencing. So at this point, once that person progresses into those moderate stages, then we're approaching that needing someone to live in with them, really for kind of those larger safety concerns. And then finally, in those late stages, a person needs someone to be living with them and providing significant physical and cognitive assistance. And by physical assistance, I mean everything from doing, providing hands-on care for washing, dressing, toileting, getting in and out of a chair, getting in and out of bed, and ultimately rolling in a bed as getting out of the bed and transfers are no longer possible. So to kind of, wrap up here at the end, I want to just give you some tips on how to support and some examples on how to support a person's independence and their autonomy. And so in general, simplifying communication from the get-go is a good idea. And so how do you do that? You want to give the person your full attention. and maintaining eye contact, you want to slow down the speed in which you're speaking. Because language is compromised, because processing speed is compromised, the act of understanding communication takes a significant amount of brain power and attention. And so we have to slow down. Listening to this talk, I've given you a lot of information in a very short period of time. This is not how I would interact with someone who's living with dementia. So talk slowly, simple sentences, one thought at a time. Pause, wait for a response. You have to wait to make sure that the person's actually taken in what it is that you've said, that they've understood what you've said, and you're giving them time to formulate a response. Giving them plenty of time, acknowledging what the person has said, go along with the person's beliefs. It's very difficult once those higher level cognition becomes impaired. This happens because we are used to, as adults, dealing on a very high cognitive level in conversations. We do a lot of problem solving, troubleshooting, back and forth, multiple highly complex topics and multiple step actions in our conversation. And when that begins to impair, you often end up with conflict because of our communication, because of a historical way in which we've communicated. And so as a person's confusion increases, excuse me, there's an element of don't argue. You'll never win an argument with a person who's in those moderate stages of dementia. It's not about arguing anymore. It's about trying to understand what their reality is and kind of going along with that, living in the moment with them. And then finally, using words of encouragement, not in a condescending or an infantilizing way, but living with dementia is hard work. It's absolutely hard work. And if using positive emotion, if you give positive emotion, the probability of you getting positive emotion back is higher. If you're putting out negative emotions, you're going to get negative emotions back. You want to think about kind of what's the match between a person's abilities and the task that you're asking them to do. You're looking for that what we call the just right challenge, where, if you have a task that's too complicated, or if your interaction, if you're over helping someone or not helping them enough, then the challenge becomes unbalanced, the situation becomes unbalanced, and conflict can occur. And so you want to try to gauge what's the right amount of support that you can provide, and how do you set the task up so that it matches what a person's abilities are. And so simplifying the task, how do you simplify the task? Offering two choices instead of saying an open-ended question, what do you want for dinner? Now you're going to say, do you want chicken or lentils? Do you want to wear the blue shirt or the green shirt? You can simplify a person's closet, so whatever they grab is fine. You can label objects in the early stages. Use visual cues. You can provide step-by-step instructions for a person as they're able to read, but not able to, if they're starting to lose sequencing, getting the step-by-steps out for that quality and to be able to make sure that all of the steps are happening. Those can be written down. Setting out items in advance in the order in which a person needs them, lining them up in the order in which person needs them, putting the clothes in the order that can be helpful. And then finally, think about, breaking a task down into multiple steps. If you got a multiple step thing, what's the first chunk of the task? Then what's the next step? Make sure that you allow enough time for people and relax the rules. Is it a problem, okay, so maybe we don't quite like the combination of this shirt with this trousers. let's relax the rules a little bit. Who's it a problem for? If it's not a problem for the person, if it's only a problem for us, maybe I'm the one who needs to adapt. Here's some example of visual cues, labels on drawers where things are, an orientation board for, what's the day, what's the time, what's the season. Using visual cues can be helpful in those early stages. A person is sequencing is beginning to be challenged. Use multiple types of cues, visual cues, verbal cues, tactile cues. And think about the activity or the task that you're asking the person to engage in. You want to make sure that it's actually something that's meaningful or enjoyable for them, especially as a person's hobbies or activities change. What is it that they enjoy doing? Um, some people, there may be new things like engaging in art or music. A person may have never done those things, and so now it's a wonderful avenue for them. I've also known some artists who got to a point where doing art was now problematic because they could see their inability to engage in something at the same level. And so there was a time where art had to go away. They were able to pick it up a little bit later, but that, just respecting what's meaningful and enjoyable for a person. So finding stimulating activities, breaking the activity into tasks, making sure that it's not too hard or it's not too easy, setting up the task so that it aligns with the person's stage. And then think about the environment that a person is working in or is engaged in. If you're going into the bathroom and it's ice cold in the winter, like it has been, these days, maybe you need to warm that bathroom up before it's time for a shower. So considering the environment, is it warm? Is it comfortable? Is there good lighting for the person? And then finally, establishing routines. As memory fades, routine becomes your friend. And so having the same routine, repeating the same steps every day reinforces that procedural memory that I was talking about earlier. Procedural memory stays intact. And so leverage procedural memory. We have a talk on home safety and adaptive solutions that's actually on our YouTube channel. And so you can go and you can find this one and you can look at Melissa's slides and you can watch that video. We also have a recording of Olivia, our Director of Early Stage and Engagement Services, on Creative Connections, where she talks about different types of activities kind of across stages. And you can access that. And, she'll be repeating that one again. So I realized that was a lot of information. And it's the top of the hour. And so if I understand if you've got an hour lunch break and you need to jump off, that's fine. But I wanted to definitely give you the opportunity to ask any questions that you have now, and I can stay on for a little bit longer, but we're scheduled till 1:15, so we've got a little bit of time that we can do that. And I also just want to reinforce that if this has brought up questions for you, you are welcome to talk directly to us and to have a one-on-one meeting or conversation with one of our navigators. And so you can register, you can go to our website and you can send a note and we will reach out and send you a link to schedule a meeting. You can call our helpline and get scheduled to talk to one of our neighbors. But again, to our navigators, but again, these are free services that are open and available to you. And as I've said, we have a number of other education opportunities.